Bismillah Rahman Rahim. We start with the first lecture in urology, that is urinary calculus disease. I will discuss the introduction of the disease, etiology, presentation, how the patient should be assessed, stone-related emergencies, and then the different options. Urolithiasis is the presence of one or more calculi at any location of the urinary tract. The incidence is like 1 to 5% of the population. In Pakistan, it is more common, particularly in Punjab, it is more common in the south of Punjab as compared to the north of Punjab. The peak incidence is like 20 to 50 years of age. Men are affected 3 times more than the females. 90% of the stones are radiopaque. Predominantly, it's a tropical disease. I mean to say is that it's more prevalent in areas with hot weather, and most of the time these patients or the disease recur until and unless the disease is treated. The etiology, number one is the lithogenic urine or the theory of supersaturation. Urine is a solution like any other solution, and as you all know that the solution consists of two parts, solvent and the solute, and if the solvent is kept, amount is kept, one amount is kept and you increase the concentration of the solute, it would precipitate and the solution would become supersaturated. And similarly, if you keep the solute same and decrease the amount of the solvent, then also it becomes supersaturation. So similar happens with the urine, that if there is chronic fluid deprivation, the urine becomes supersaturated. If the amount of salts in the urine is increased, the urine becomes supersaturated. And if there is changes in the pH of the urine, even then the urine becomes supersaturation. Then there is a theory of stone inhibitors. There are certain inhibitors present in the urine which doesn't allow the different salts to combine. Like the most common is the calcium oxalate, but if the citrate are present in normal amount, it won't allow the calcium to combine with the oxalate, rather it would form a calcium citrate which would be excreted in the urine. So when there is deficiency of these stone inhibitors, the urine becomes lithogenic. The most 3 common stone inhibitors are citrate, magnesium, and the pyrophosphates. Then there is another is the stasis. Whenever there is stasis in the urinary system, there are chances of stone formation. Like the pelvic obstruction in the upper urinary tract, if there is pelvic obstruction, the stones are formed. Similarly, in lower urinary tract, if there is BPH or stricture urethra, there is a stasis and the stones are formed. Similarly, if there are foreign bodies inside the urinary tract, it also lead to stone formation. And sometimes we do not know, or we are not able to document any of these theories or etiologies, and even then the stones are formed. It's due to idiopathic etiology. There is no known etiology for the stone formation. There are different types of stones. Most common is the calcium oxalate. Number 2 is the magnesium calcium ammonium phosphate, then the uric acids and the cysteines, and there is a mixed stones. In developed countries, the most common is the calcium oxalate. Number 2, the magnesium calcium ammonium phosphates. But in Pakistan, we have done a study here in Pakistan. The most of the stones are of mixed etiology. It's not, there are very few cases of pure calcium oxalate like it's documented in the developed countries. So calcium oxalate, these are the most common. The most common cause is hypercalciuria. When there is more amount of calcium excretion in the urine. Causes of renal hypercalciuria is the common is the hyperparathyroidism. or the patient with bone metastasis, or when there is increased calcium absorption from the gut, it will lead to hypercalciuria. These calcium oxalate stones are usually dark brown, spiky, and they are radiopaque. They are visible on the X-rays. And these calcium oxalate stones, even these are, if they are small, they lead to symptoms. So calcium oxalate stones are of two types: calcium oxalate monohydrate and the calcium oxalate dihydrate. The monohydrate, these are usually spiky stones, very hard to break. The calcium oxalate dihydrate are spiky but not so spiky like the calcium oxalate monohydrate, and these are less hard as compared to calcium oxalate monohydrate. Magnesium, calcium, ammonium phosphate stones. These are also called triple phosphate stones. They are usually formed due to infections by the urea splitting organism. The most common culprit is the Proteus. There are other organisms like Klebsiella and the Pseudomonas. They also urea splitting organism, and when the urea is splitted or urea is broken, urea is normally present in the urine, but when it is broken, it leads to formation of the ammonia in the urine, and ammonium lead to increase in urinary pH. So these stones usually are staghorn stones. They form the shape of thus calyces, so they look like staghorn. They are also radiopaque, but not as radiopaque as the calcium oxalate stones. Most of the time, these infection stones are asymptomatic. So magnesium, calcium, ammonium phosphate stones are also called triple phosphate stones. They are also called as infection stones. They are also called as Stewart stones. So this is the shape of these triple phosphate stone. These are like staghorn. This is the stag, like the horn of the stag, Barasingha. So the horns of the stag. These stones are formed in the calyces. They are generated or they are formed in the calyces. From the calyces, they migrate down into the urine, in the ureter. So there are three level of constrictions where these stones may be stuck up. One is at the pelvic junction. Number two is where the ureter passes in front of the iliac vessels, and number three where the stone at the level of vesico-ureteric junction. This is I have already discussed. Like for the upper urinary tract stones, the stones in the urinary bladder, they may drop from the upper tracts, which are called primary urinary bladder stones, because these are formed in the uninfected urine, or they may be secondary bladder stones, which are formed in the infected urine, or when there is distal obstruction like stricture, or there is BPH, so these stones are formed. Etiology we have already discussed. Sometimes it's idiopathic, like 40-50% of the cases we do not know about the exact etiology of renal stones. There are some dietary factors which should be taken into account, like patients with low fluid intake, high protein diet, high salt intake diet, high purine diet, and the oxalate diet. They are more likely to develop these stones. And hyperuricemia, when the patient have got high level of uric acid in the blood, there are more chances that they would lead to stone formation. Urinary stasis, I have already discussed. Whenever there is urinary stasis in the urinary tract, it will lead to stone formation. Chronic infection, I have already discussed. Prolonged immobilization of the patient, if like the patient with spinal cord injury or paraplegic, there is absorption of calcium from the bone, will lead to hypercalcemia and stone formation. Etiology of the vesical calculi, we have already discussed when there is a distal obstruction. I mean, there is there. I mean, there is residual urine in the bladder, and there is infection and the formation of stone. If there is foreign body in the bladder, it also leads to stone formation. Or when there is a bladder diverticulum, there are chances that the patient can develop bladder stone. The clinical features, most common is the pain, or some patient presents with hematuria, and some presents with complications of stone disease. So pain is the most common presentation. For ureteric stones, there is a lumbar pain which radiates towards the testes in males and towards the labia majora in females. While the renal pain is usually fixed in the loin, it doesn't radiate. Bladder stones, the patient would have frequency, urgency, dysuria, lower urinary tract symptoms, and the patient might have suprapubic pain. Hematuria is always painful. It's usually microscopic. In 80 to 90% of the cases, RBCs are present on microscopy. Clinical features of complication. Patient may present with infected hydronephrosis. When there is a block in the ureter, it leads to hydronephrosis, and if this hydronephrosis is infected, it may develop into pyonephrosis and the urosepsis. Patient may present with chronic renal failure. Patient may present with complications of Stagg-on stones. Stagg-on stone in the kidney may lead to squamous cell carcinoma of the kidney, and the bladder stone in the bladder may lead to formation of squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder. Patient may present with xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis. This is usually developed in patients with diabetes. This is the end stage of chronic inflammation. It's difficult to treat, and ultimately the patient presents or end up with nephrectomy. So how the patient should be assessed? The objective is to confirm the diagnosis, exclude the complications, locate the site and size of the stones, and then accordingly we plan the therapy. So when the patient presents with loin pain, there is a differential diagnosis. The differential diagnosis, there are some non-urological diseases and some urological diseases which have the same presentation. If the patient have loin pain on the right side, look for the exclude the appendicitis, and if the patient has got pain in the left lumbar region, always exclude the diverticulitis. Sometimes the patient has radiculitis. It's the compressed nerves, lumbar nerves between the vertebrae. They also present similarly, but the differential you can differentiate. The patient with radiculitis would have pain increases on bending or saying prayers or by doing heavy work. But in case of stone disease, usually the pain is not increased by doing hard work or bending. And sometimes the patient has got pyelonephritis. This patient would have pain in the lumbar region, but patient would also have fever. So patient with loin pain and the fever, it tells us that the patient is having pyelonephritis. So how it's investigated? It can be investigated by urine complete examination, X-ray plain abdomen, ultrasound abdomen, CT or IVU. These are the different investigations, but the investigation of choice is the ultrasound and the CT plain abdomen. So we should also try to look for the etiology of the disease, how it can be done. It can be done when we submit the stone for analysis. By looking into the analysis, we can have some clue about the disease, or by looking, asking for the serum calcium and the serum uric acid, we can look for the etiology. And look for the complications. We can look for the complications like by asking for serum creatinine or CBC. We can look for the complications, and by imaging like ultrasonography or CT. What are the high assessment of high risk patient? The high risk patient are the children, patients with bilateral stone, patients with recurrent stones, patients who have got anatomic or biochemical anomaly, patients with large stones, they are high risk. Patients with single kidney are also high risk, and when there is strong family history. Management, there are two sort of management. One is the emergency management of the stone disease, and then is the definitive management. The emergency management is the relief of pain. Just give the patient with 100 milligram of diclofenac sodium intramuscular. It would lead to relief of pain. And regarding the oral fluids, it's controversial, but now the consensus is that the patient should not be asked to have a lot of fluids, at least during the colic, when the patient is having colic. Once the colic is relieved, then when you ask the patient to go for preventive therapy, that's yes, one can have a lot of fluids. Definitive management, if the stone size is less than 4 millimeter, there are 80% chance that the stone would pass. If the stone size is 4 to 6, there are 50% chances. If the stone size is more than 6 millimeter, there are only 10% that the patient would develop, that the stone would pass spontaneously. So if the stone size is less than 5 millimeter, go for the conservative management. And then the management of the emergencies, obstructed, infected tract, the kidney is obstructed and infected, this is a surgical emergency, or the patient presents with calculus and urea, like if both ureters get obstructed by stones, patient is unable to have micturition, this is a surgical emergency, or the patient is having with single kidney and the stone stuck up in the ureter, patient would have anuria. There is total absence of production of urine. So surgical emergency, either pass the ureteric stents from below by doing a ureteroscopy, or put in a tube inside the kidney under the ultrasound control. This is called percutaneous nephrostomy. The patient will start pouring out urine from the kidney by both the methods. Indication for intervention, absolute indication is urosepsis, or when there is decreased renal function. Relative indication for intervention are intractable pain, which is not subsiding with the drugs, or if there is very large stone, that is also indication for intervention. Or if the stone is not moving, stone is in the ureter and it's not moving, that is also indication for intervention. And the occupation, the pilots, pilots are the only professions who are not allowed to fly with stone inside the urinary tract. It has to be removed before they start flying. Treatment options, different treatment options may be conservative, ESWL. ESWL stands for extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy. Then is the utenoscopy, then is the percutaneous nephrolithotomy, and then the open surgery. Intervention depends upon the stone size, site, availability of the treatment, abnormal anatomy or the urinary tract, and the patient wish should also be taken into consideration. Conservative management is also called medical expulsive therapy. It is indicated when the stone size is less than 5 millimeter and the stone is distal in the ureter and pain is well controlled. Absence of renal failure and sepsis, these are the prerequisite when you can start this conservative management. And what is conservative management? Conservative management is the administration of diclofenac sodium. It would helps in the relief of pain as well as due to its anti-inflammatory effect. It also helps in the stone movement and also start the alpha blockers if the stones are in the ureter. It has these alpha blockers also help in passage of stone. And then at the end of this conservative therapy is usually prescribed for 10 days to 2 weeks, and at the end of conservative therapy review and ensure that the stone has passed. Absence of pain doesn't confirm the stone expulsion, that if there is no pain it doesn't mean that the stone has been passed. Extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy usually indicated when the stone size is like 2 centimeter in the pelvis of the kidney or in the upper ureter. It may need multiple treatment sessions. The contraindications are urosepsis, pregnancy, coagulopathies, renal artery aneurysm. So it's not without complications. The complications of ESWL is infection, renal hematoma, development of renal hematoma, obstruction of the ureter by the broken segment, and the hypertension and damage to the kidney as well as to the adjacent organs. The advantages of ESWL is a non-invasive. Up to most of the stones are up to 2 centimeters, so most of the stones can be removed by ESWL. It's an outpatient procedure, no anesthesia is required, no admission is required. So the limitation is it's not that effective in lower polar stones. If the stones are larger than 2 centimeters, it's not effective. And if the stones are hard, very hard, like the cysteine and calcium oxalate monohydrate, simply we decide about the extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy by asking for the CT scan film. If the Hounsfield units of the CT are more than 1000, we do not render these patients for shockwave lithotripsy, because in these cases if the Hounsfield units are more than 1000 units on CT, these are very hard stone and very unlikely to be broken by shockwave lithotripsy. And this is the lithotripsy machine. This is the X-ray C-arm where the stone is localized, fixed, and on the back or side of the patient, the blue area which is pointed by a red line is the head of the machine, which is focused onto the stone, and the stone is broken. The shock waves, they are focused onto the stone inside the kidney, and these shock waves are given and the stone is broken. These are the different endourological gadgets which are used for stone. This is the laser, this is the utonoscope, semi-rigid, this is flexible utonoscope. So these are very frequently used in endourology. So the two definitive procedures are the PCNL and the open surgery. PCNL stands for percutaneous nephrolithotomy, and open surgery is called pyelolithotomy. This is the right side of the screen is the scar mark for pyelolithotomy. In pyelolithotomy, this is 6 to 8 inch incision, lumbar incision, where the muscles are cut and the kidney is approached, and then the muscles are stitched back. Is very traumatic as compared to the scar for the PCNL. This is on the left side of the screen. There are two scar marks for the PCNL, recently PCNL, bilateral PCNL done recently, and you can compare the scar with the scar of pyelolithotomy. Management of bladder stone. If the bladder stone is more than 3 centimeter, it's better to either to do cystolithotomy or vasculithotomy, or one can also remove it endoscopically by doing percutaneous cystolithotipsy. But if the stone is less than 3 centimeter, it can be removed endoscopically through urethra by doing lithotripsy. Thank you very much. Thank you for the patient hearing. My email address is here, and you can send me email if there is any question or query, and hopefully I'll back to you very soon with a new topic in urology. Thank you very much. God bless all of you.